God made us in his image. God made us to represent him. But you know the story of the Bible well enough to know that shortly after humanity was created, humanity sinned. And then interestingly, in Matthew chapter 5, when Adam has a son named Seth, we are told that Seth was made in Adam's image. And I think that's there for a reason. There is a shift that takes place. And so from that point on, humanity has struggled. We've struggled with sin. Why? Because that's what we see everywhere we go. Every role model we have, and we all have role models, everywhere we look, we see sin. And what we needed was someone to step back into our continuum who would give us the image of God again. And that's what Jesus did. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, the Word became flesh. So Jesus lived so that we can take on the image of God again. So that's what we've been talking about over the last several days. What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus Christ or an apprentice of Jesus Christ? Tonight we're going to talk about the issue of love. Love. So let's start with this. Think for just a moment about how cultures have been infatuated for centuries with the idea of love. Okay? Think for a moment about a song that you know of that's either about love or it has love in the title. Okay? Think for a moment. Okay? Grace, you have your hand up. Love lifted me? Okay, that's good. I'm thinking about non-church songs, but that's the one we just sang, so it's fresh on your mind. Good. What about a non-church song, a secular song? All we need is love. Okay, what else? Love is a many splendor thing. Going back a few years, but there you go. What else?
Love me tender.
Love me tender, love me true.
It's on Nat King Cole, Love.
Oh, Nat King Cole, what?
His song, Love.
Okay. Now, that's a little bit before my time, but that's okay. Okay. Let me give you a few that I found. Elvis Presley, Love Me Tender. Lionel Richie and Diana Ross exclaimed, Endless Love. Going back to the 80s there. The Beatles decided all you need is love. Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You. Beyonce observed love is crazy. Lady Gaga, Love is Stupid. Queen discovered a crazy little thing called love, and they looked for somebody to love. Huey Lewis in the News sang, That's the Power of Love. Bon Jovi shouted, You give love a bad name. Stevie Wonder, I just called to say I love you. And some have asked the most fundamental questions about love. Foreigner, I want to know what love is. And there was one hit wonder from the early 2000s, what is love? And there are probably a lot of others. I may have completely distracted you for the rest of the night because you're going to be singing these songs in your head. But my point is that as a culture, humanity has always been fascinated by love. Why is that? And to add to that, studies have shown that children, if they are not given love at a young age, it will stymie their development for the rest of their life. Right? I don't think that's an accident. Because you know what the Bible tells us? John tells us in 1 John chapter 4 that God is love. Now you put those two ideas together, and guys, that's a fascinating idea. That God is love, and humanity, we crave love. Isn't that cool? That God made us for himself, and the one thing that we all know we need in some form or another is the very thing that God is and God gives. I find that incredibly comforting and amazing. Now we need to understand before we get into the lesson tonight what we're dealing with when we talk about love. All right? What do we typically think love is? Typically. An emotion. All right? And there is an emotional side of love, thankfully. But when we talk about love from a biblical standpoint, you need to know that the idea that's being presented there is not the emotion, but rather love is the idea of someone doing something for someone else in a self-sacrificing way. That what you want more than anything else when you love someone is you want to do what is best for them. All right? It is somewhat detached from emotion. It's not driven by emotion. It's driven by a desire for the best for someone else. And that's where we struggle with the idea of loving our enemies. Well, when you take the emotional aspect out of it and you start thinking about my enemy being a soul that has been created by God who will one day face him, that's where the sacrificial goodwill should start coming out. But I do want to back away from that just a little bit. That's the statement about what love is from a biblical standpoint, that it's not driven by emotion, but I do want you to realize it's not divorced from emotions. Love that's not driven, well, love that doesn't involve emotions on some level isn't very satisfying. You can have two people who marry one another. What were you going to say, Bill?
You love the Lord with your heart, soul, and mind. That's the intellect, the emotion, and the will.
That's right.
All component of the complete love that carries man of God.
That's right. Does God want an emotional love from us? Yeah, he does. All right. I was going to tell this later. I'm going to tell it now. I was in a Bible class years ago at a congregation that I was pretty familiar with. I was just there in the Bible class, and the guy who got up to teach the class, let's just say he and I would differ with one another sometimes on some issues. And so when I saw he was teaching the class, I looked at my wife and I said, I'm not going to say anything in the class tonight. I'm just going to keep quiet. She goes, that's a good idea. So I did a pretty good job most of the class until he said this. He said, God doesn't care how you feel about him as long as you obey him. And I just put my head down and started praying. And Teresa started patting my leg, and I looked at her. She was just quiet. And I raised my hand. And I think he was just as afraid of seeing my hand raised as I was to raise my hand. And he called on me, and I said, you just said that God doesn't care how we feel about him as long as we obey him. Did that come out the way you intended? And he backed away from it a little bit, but not enough, I think. Love is not driven by emotions, but love can have an emotional component. You think about a marriage. If it's just two people who decided to be with one another, what's that marriage going to be like? Probably not that good, right? By churches that are filled with people who are determined to be with one another, that's almost a hostage situation, right? No. So as we go through this, I don't want you to think that love is separated from emotions, because love can be a very powerful emotion. But we do need to understand, as we talk about the lesson tonight, that we're not talking about a straight-up emotional response. All right, everybody's on the same page now with me? So love is this powerful thing, and it comes from, first of all, from God. You know John 3:16, God so loved the world that he gave his only son. You may not think about Galatians 2 verse 20 as much, though, where Paul said, I've been crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. So, from the very beginning, God is a God who loves, and Christ is a God who loves. All right? So, with that in mind, here's my opening question for you tonight. Oh, my goals again. Okay, I talked about these Sunday morning. My goals as a teacher with you over the next, tonight and tomorrow night, previous lessons. First of all, to show our need for a true example in how to live. Everybody's looking for an example. Everybody's trying to find someone who can show me what's the best way to live. Jesus Christ did that. I submitted on Sunday morning in 5 particular areas. Jesus Christ lived in peace. He lived with joy. He lived with purpose. He lived with confidence. and he lived a life of significance. Those are all things we long for. And Jesus nailed them all. And so he's the one we look to. He is the one who is going to be the example for our life, and you and I learn how to live by doing what he did. So tonight we're going to talk about the idea of loving and sharing our lives like others. Now I want to sort of jump back for a moment from the whole lesson. Hopefully you've looked over it. If not, this is going to be a question you're going to have some answers for. The question is this: what are some ways that Jesus showed love in his life? What are some ways Jesus showed love in his life? All right, Jesus had remarkable compassion. We're going to talk about that in the lesson tonight. Matthew chapter 9. Jesus looked at a crowd and he saw people who were like sheep without a shepherd. He had compassion on them. All right, what other ways? What's that? He died on the cross for our sins, the sins of the whole world. All right, what else? What other stories do you remember?
Although he was basically demonstrating his power as being from God. He did give us that power without but he was said
Yeah,
to raise the dead, to do all these different things.
yeah.
So that shows there's a love, underlying love that shows in that.
All right, and that's an important element, that Jesus not only had compassion, but he acted upon his compassion. We're going to sort of start landing the lesson tonight in that spot. It's not enough for us to decide we're going to love other people. We've got to act upon that love for other people. All right, very good comments. Anyone else? All right, Alan?
Jesus demonstrated his love and his patience with everyone he came in contact with. Now, he did get frustrated with the Pharisees.
Yeah.
But there were times when he was patient with them, even still. But patient, when I think about his patience, I think about his patience with his apostles. How they time and time again just didn't get it.
Yeah.
And Jesus was patient with them.
That's right. And they were around him, some of them, a lot for 3 years. But they still didn't get it. They still didn't get it. All right? Sister Martha? What's that? His service. All right. Jesus, Matthew chapter 20, said, I came to be a servant. Brother Billy Jack? All right. When he saw the family grieving, and he grieved, and he brought Lazarus back from the dead. Okay? Yes, sir.
You show us how to forgive. I mean, not only from the cross, but forgiving the thief on the cross.
Yeah.
Just his compassion for everyone.
So one of the greatest elements of his expressions of his love was his willingness to be forgiving. Is that something anybody has a problem with? We all do, right? You know why? Because they did it to me. And sometimes what people do to others is really, really bad. I do not want to make light of that. But Jesus' teaching that we are here to show love, and sometimes that means that I forgive somebody who they may not deserve it. Because did I deserve it? Did you deserve it? And yet he forgives. Beautiful. You see, over and over again, the whole life of Jesus Christ was a life of love. And almost every story of Jesus points us to this love that actually is very intimidating, right? It's really intimidating. I struggle with it. But that's okay. A football player, if he's really good, a quarterback, he may be able to throw a ball 50 or 60 yards. Right? If he's really, really good, maybe pushing 65 or 70 yards. I can guarantee you every quarterback, especially on the pro level, probably college too, they want to throw that ball as far as they can. But they've got to realize they may not always throw it 65 yards. But they're going to throw it a lot farther than if they don't try. And that's the encouragement I want to give you tonight, because I try to give it to myself. When it comes to my expression of love for other people, I fail. But I do know what the standard is that I'm supposed to reach for. And I will guarantee you, if you try to love, even when you fail, as long as you're trying to do it, you're going to do better than if you don't. All right? That's good news, I think. Brother Nix.
Jesus had a close relationship with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. They have the expression, Jesus wept.
Yep.
That tells you something about how he felt for someone who was in his life.
Yeah.
Even though he knew what he could do about that,
Mm-hmm.
he realized that his two sisters, Lazarus' two sisters, were also grieving.
Yeah.
So he felt compassion for all of them.
Mm-hmm. So Brother Nix brought up, like Brother Billy Jack brought up Lazarus, but Brother Nix brought up Mary and Martha. And Jesus wept because he felt the pain that they were going through. All right, now let's jump into John chapter 13. John chapter 13. We're going to look at verses 34 and 35 in just a moment, but I got to set it up with verse 1 of John chapter 13. John chapter 13, verse 1. Jesus is going to be with his disciples. This is just before his crucifixion. Now, before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. I heard a preacher years ago, and maybe it's because I'm a child of the 80s, his paraphrase was, he loved them to the max. Okay? He loved them to the max. And that's an incredible statement because who were the disciples at this point? Who do we know was one of the disciples in the room? Judas. And it doesn't say he loved the disciples with the exception of Judas. Even the one that he knew soon was going to betray him, he loved him to the end. He's going to wash his feet. One of the things we see with the disciples quite often in the Gospels is they're jockeying for position. They're trying to make sure they get above the other people, the other guys. They're number one. Number two, we're going to talk about James and John in a few. Jesus knew that. But he loved them. And we're going to read in a few minutes where he washed their feet, but I want you to look at verses 34 and 35. And this is what transitions into our life. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. So, question number one tonight. How does it challenge you to know that love is the visible mark of discipleship? So that's what Jesus said, right?
We confuse sometimes what we say to help identify us or not identify us. When our actions are surefire giveaway for what's going on. So the responsibility of me to represent the person that I profess to be a disciple of in a way that honors him and not just gets me out of trouble or gets me out of order or he gets to keep it.
Yeah. Rebecca?
I think for me, at least, it's always been true, but as our culture gets more angry and more yelling and more easily frustrated, it's easy for me to become more angry,
Yeah.
easily frustrated. And, when you fuss at the service person in the grocery store, at the airplane counter, I don't know, in your car, you are not showing Jesus to that person. And they may very well not know Jesus, and they're certainly not leading him
Yeah.
to lead him.
Yeah. Guys, we got to realize that every day we come in contact with someone else, we are the image of Christ for them. And that means that we need to think about how we come across. Right? It's always a challenge for me coming into a new place to think about how far I can go with this. But I am a child of God before I am an American. I'm a child of God before I'm a man. I'm a child of God before everything else. And it is hard sometimes. Do you find it challenging to figure out the line between standing up for yourself in a needed situation and still being a Christian? Is that challenging for you sometimes? When my wife was going through, I mentioned to you that she had lymphoma. When she was going through that, she had a test that she was supposed to get, and there was a mix-up with the insurance and the doctor's office, and I was livid. And I called the insurance company, and I prayed before I did it because I knew I had to be assertive. But I knew that I also was a Christian. And I've got to say this in a non-personal way, but in a firm way. And that was hard. I don't know if you've been in a situation like that. You almost feel like, well, if I'm a Christian, I can't stand up for myself. I don't think that's true. Read Acts chapter 16, where the Apostle Paul's thrown in prison. And by the end of that story, he's in prison wrongly, and the leaders of the city decide, we got to get him out of here. It's going to cause trouble. And he's told, hey, you can go home. Paul goes, no, not so fast. We got to talk about something. You know, you did something you were supposed to do. So we can defend ourselves, but it is hard to make sure we do it in a loving way. Okay? What else? Bill?
I didn't make this, I think maybe it's Robert that said this, but
And then, Robert, you had your hand up too, didn't you? Okay.
there was a conversation I had with somebody. If the next thing I said after that conversation is, how do you feel about Jesus Christ? How would those two conversations pair?
Yeah.
And by the time I've taken the waiter's head off, he's getting my food out of his mouth. Not going to be very effective in
Yeah.
saying, you know, I'm supposed to be a Christian.
Yeah. You remember this statement, this was really big, I guess, in the early 2000s, WWJD, what would Jesus do? I heard, some people, oh, that's a silly statement. I think it's a pretty good statement. In any scenario that you've got to face, how would Jesus handle this? Okay, poor service at the restaurant, someone cutting me off on the road, whatever. What would Jesus do? That'll humble you. Brother Allen.
Read verse 34. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. I have loved you, that you also love one another. God always expected his people to love those around them. But I think the challenging part of this is, and I don't know if this is the new part of this or not, to love as I
Right.
have loved you.
Yeah,
That's the hard part.
yeah,
Because it's easy to love those that love us. It's hard to love those that are our enemies, but yet that is the picture that we have of the Father as Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount.
that's right.
And that, to me, is what's new about this, is loving as Jesus loved.
Right. And I agree with you. When Jesus said a new commandment, well, were they not commanded to love one another in the Old Testament? Well, of course they were. But the standard was raised. How high was that standard? The standard was you love the way Jesus. And the disciples at that moment would not fully understand that standard until they saw him on the cross. Then they would suddenly go, that's how much we're supposed to love. And that is hard. Now, I had someone one time call me out on this, and he says, well, wait a minute. Jesus there is saying that a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. He's not saying we love everybody like that. How would you respond to that? You had it in your answer, by the way. Jesus loved everybody. Jesus said we're supposed to love our enemies. So, guys, we got to love everybody. All right? Now, again, you're going like, well, I don't know if I like everybody. Okay, fair enough. I'll say this has been debated sometimes. I don't know if we have to like everybody. There are some people that are not likable, but I do have to love everybody. And that's why it's important for me to separate the emotion from the action. Okay, Rebecca?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think Jesus answered that in a good scenario. Who is my neighbor?
Yeah.
Everybody.
Whoever you come across that you have a responsibility to help. Okay, let me ask you this. How can love be demonstrated in our families? How can love be demonstrated in our families? Self-sacrifice. Wife, husband, children. Brother Robert?
It's contrary to what our kids think, but discipline is showing love.
Yeah. Discipline. The way we speak to one another. Not excusing yourself because you had a bad day. And I get it. Everybody has bad days sometimes. One time, Teresa and I were supposed to be somewhere to eat with a family. They'd invited us over. And she went over, long story short, she went over to someone's house to help them. This was before cell phones. And she wasn't there when we were supposed to leave. And I couldn't call her. And I'm fuming. And it's not like 5 minutes late. It's not 10 minutes late. It's not 15 minutes late. It's 30 minutes late. You can tell it still bothers me a little bit. And when she got in, I was furious. And I was rude. I was rude. I had to apologize to her later. I had to apologize to my girls. And that was hard. But I was not showing love. And I don't know if you've been in a situation like that. Husbands or wives. How about to our brothers and sisters? Love suffers long. We're going to talk about in just a little while how we can do a better job loving. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to bring it into our life and let you realize this is something real that has to be practiced. And we can't excuse ourselves. You know, you can say, well, I have a short temper and I just sort of blow up sometimes. Okay, you may be like that. Is that what Christ wants you to land on? And I think the answer we would all agree is no. So, understanding your weakness, how do I work on this? How do I work on loving more? Rebecca?
I wanted to tie into Robert's comment. And he's right, when I was a child, I didn't understand that discipline was dad showing love. Figured he'd just like to hit us. I'm kidding. But I think it's true in all these relationships you brought up, right? If you love your spouse, if you love your fellow Christian, and they're headed in the wrong direction, you, with love, will try to talk to them about it. Not in a, I'm better than you, your tone and your attitude can make that conversation terrible, or it can make that conversation possibly beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the number one things that gets in the way of our love for others is our pride. I don't know the marital state of anyone in this congregation. I don't know if anyone's having marital problems. And I say this with the caveat, and that is this. I have never known a divorce take place between two people who are committed to the Lord. I've seen a divorce take place between two people where one's committed to the Lord and the other was not. Or two people who aren't committed to the Lord. But I've never seen a divorce take place between two people who are committed to the Lord. And I've been in situations where I've talked to husbands in particular, and it's like, well, I was wrong here. Did you say you were sorry? Nope. You need to say you're sorry. A week later, did you say you're sorry? Nope. A month later, did you say you're sorry? Nope. You don't love them. Love expresses itself for the best of the other person. Let's look at Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. Matthew 22. Jesus is asked by a lawyer, "Teacher, what is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and the first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." Verse 40, on these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. A couple of cool things about this. How many commandments does the lawyer want to know are the greatest? Okay, one, right? You just give me the top one so I can work on it. How many does Jesus give? Kind of do. Okay? And I think what's interesting about that is Jesus is saying, I'm going to give you two, but they can't be separated from one another. You are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind. That's the first one. But you need to know it goes hand in hand with the second. You love your neighbor as yourself. Why are those hard to keep together? Are those hard to keep together?
Well, you come in contact with your neighbor in every single way. You see the fault, you have your fault.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just can't, like you said, you may not like the person, but you should love them. So you have an unlikable person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that makes it difficult.
It is. And sometimes some people genuinely are unlikable, right? We've all run across that person. Okay. In our culture today, we call them Karens. No offense to anyone named Karen, but we've all heard that Karen. There are some people who genuinely are unlikable. In theory, is it easy to love God? In theory? Yeah, I think so. He's created you. He wants to bless you. He wants to forgive you. He wants to give you a home in heaven. I mean, how much better can it get than that? So, in theory, it's easy to love God. But as Brother Nick said, we know other people. We know our neighbor. We know our brethren. We know our spouse. And that becomes a little more challenging. And it's easy for me to excuse myself from loving them. But Jesus said you can't. You can't separate the two. If you're to love God, you have to love your neighbor. All right? And this is the problem the world has, by the way. We want to say we love our neighbor without loving God. That doesn't fly either. Because then I become very selective as to who my neighbor is. So don't miss the significance of this. And much like John chapter 13, where Jesus said, all the world will know you're my disciples by the way you love one another, Jesus says here, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commands. You know what he's saying there? This is what God has always wanted. God has always wanted, Old Testament and New Testament, his people to act in loving ways toward other people. Let's jump out of this one. Talked about this. Okay. What happens to obedience when love is removed from the center? And again, we're talking about you love the Lord your God, you love your neighbor as yourself. What happens to obedience when we take love out of it?
No motivation.
There's no motivation. Now, the story I told about the teacher who said God doesn't care how you feel about him, I was going to give it there. We probably all known people, and maybe at times we've been that person, who says we love God, but we don't feel connected to him at all. But I dare say most of us, in those moments where we have felt the closest to God, it's been when we're obeying him because we love him. That's why the psalmist said in Psalm 51, sacrifice and burnt offering you do not desire. What you want is the heart. It's always a weird idea because God, he commanded those things, didn't he? So how is it that God doesn't want those things and yet he commands them? Because those things were to be expressed in our heart. That's what God wants. God doesn't want you just to obey him. God loves you so much. What God wants is for you to love him too. And the way we express our love is in the Old Testament, burnt offerings and sacrifice. For us today, it's worship me. Make sure you're doing it in a respectful way. But it's about love. But that love is connected to our love for our neighbor. Really quickly. We talked about this the other day. I'll skip over this one, where James and John wanted to be on the right hand and the left hand of Jesus. You remember that? We looked at Matthew chapter 20. It's funny, Matthew chapter 20, James and John have their mother go and ask Jesus. You know, that's not cool. You're not an adult if you're sending your mom in to ask for a favor for you. But they're wanting to be number one and number two. And we know that wasn't just something they dealt with, because when the other disciples heard what they asked, they got mad at James and John because they wanted the same thing. Jesus said, guys, that's the way the world operates. That's not the way things work in this kingdom. Service. Jesus said, I came to serve. What motivated his service? Love. What does he want from us? He wants to love so much that we serve. We serve this church. We serve out in the community. We care about other people. Dealt with that one. John chapter 13. Go back to John 13. Brother Nick's brought this up a moment ago. Jesus washed the feet of the disciples. This is where Jesus' love found its expression. How much do we read of this? John chapter 13. Verse 3. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, he tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with a towel that he wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? Jesus answered him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. And Peter, being Peter, said, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Here's a question I want you to think about. Why was foot washing such a shocking act for Jesus to engage in?
They were nasty.
What's that?
The feet were nasty.
Everybody's feet were nasty. You ever, like during the summer months, wear sandals or something like that? Those of us who are older, we like Crocs, and that's like a big joke. Sir? That's right. So, your feet during the summer months, when you have those, open sandals, they get a little nasty. You come in after walking around, your toes are dirty. That's what they had all the time. They walked on streets that were dusty streets. They didn't have paved streets. And there were other things on the streets that made the streets nasty. So what they always had in someone's house for a meal was a servant who would wash the feet of everyone when they come in. Because you got to keep in mind, more than likely, they were all around a low table. They weren't sitting in chairs. Most historians agree. And they were like reclining on their side. So I'm right here, and Bill, he's right there, and all around the circle, guess whose feet are in my face? Bill's feet are in my face. Okay, John's feet were in Peter's face. And that was true for everybody. And all of them knew that their feet were in someone else's face. But nobody was going to take the water out and wash, because that lowered them in the circle, and everybody's fighting to see who's the most preeminent, right? So everybody knows everybody's feet stink, but no one is doing anything about it. And Jesus is watching all of this. And then Jesus does. Quick point. We talked about this, but just to reinforce it here. Love acts. Love humbles itself. Love does what needs to be done. And let me just jump to this one. We've talked about this one a little bit so far, so I'll just throw that out there. Mark chapter 9. Jesus saw the crowd, and he had compassion on them. All right?
Kind of in connection with that. There's so many examples where
not prominent, not important, sometimes nasty. Okay, I don't care, I'll share things with myself. I'm an open book. Going to Brooklyn, I have maybe some right-wing moments sometimes. And going to Brooklyn, you can get your temperature riled up pretty quickly walking around. Walk down by the library, you see this person holding a big sign for abortion, and this person over here has a big sign for gay rights. And I'll admit that my first reaction when I move there sometimes is just start getting mad. Get so mad, I just wanted to start fighting. Until I started asking myself, what did Jesus want me to do here? And I'm not saying that we don't stand for truth. But Jesus saw people as souls in a way that sometimes I forget. I made the comment yesterday that, guys, Jesus called the devil the prince of this world. The world does not want us to love one another. That's why we have to be different. The world is used to seeing people fight. They're used to seeing people get angry. We don't show the world we are any different. We show the world we're different when we live by a higher standard. And it's hard. It's hard. Being a Christian is difficult sometimes. Living by the standard of Christ will admittedly be hard. You say, I fail sometimes. Fair enough. Recognize you failed and ask God to forgive you. So I want to close with this. I want to spend just a few minutes asking two questions. First of all, how have you been able to better embrace love for other people in your life? How have you been able to better embrace love for other people?
Keep your focus on Jesus.
What's that?
Keep your focus on Jesus.
Keep your focus on Jesus. Because Jesus loved them.
Right. Well, and if I focus on Jesus, I am reminded of what I needed from Jesus and how the person holding the sign that I completely disagree with also needs Jesus.
That's right.
And in that moment, I have to ask myself, what's the best way to show that person Jesus in this moment?
That's right.
Sometimes the moment calls for me to bring up, I disagree with your sign. Sometimes it's just, I need to meet them and get to know them, and we'll get to the sign later.
Yeah, maybe so. Every moment isn't the time for battle. Maybe you need to build relationships for a while. Maybe something needs to be said. Okay, pray for wisdom to know. And then when you're in that moment, be thinking about what's my goal here. Right? I think at breakfast this morning, Bill and Greg and I were talking about in our social media age. You see on YouTube videos, this person destroys the other person, and we're like, yeah, that's what I want to see. I want to see this conservative guy destroy the liberal guy. That's not what our goal is, right? What's our goal? What's Jesus' goal? To save people. To save them. I got to remember that. I got to remember that. Brother Nate. And who were they that he asked for forgiveness? The ones who held him to the ground, drove nails through his hands and his feet, who placed a crown of thorns on his head, who beat his back. Even in that moment, with every strike of the hammer, Christ was thinking, these people are lost. My creation is lost.
So my answer to that question is, you need to recognize everybody is unique, that they have a soul, and there's a destination involved.
That's right. They have a soul and destination. Let me give you a couple of things. This has sort of been brought up. Hey, Brother Clark.
I, for one, think it helps me to realize we're all
Yeah. We're all sinners, and we need to be paddling together. What I listed here was I need to be amazed at how much he's loved me. Because here's my problem. I think they're worse than I am. They're not. I think about what Paul said in 1 Timothy chapter 1. Paul said, I'm the chief of sinners. You ever wonder about that statement? Really, Paul? Would Paul really be the worst of sinners? Here's my answer. In his mind, he was. In his mind, he was. And the more humble I am, the more I recognize what he's forgiven me. What about these people over here in Brooklyn who are advocating gay rights? Is he willing to forgive them? Of course he is. Of course he is. Here's another thing. Tune out the voices that separate us. I mentioned this yesterday. Guys, we need to be turning off television. I'm not saying disengage from the world, not saying that. We are allowing the world to influence our thinking too much. We've got to let God influence our thinking. That doesn't mean we compromise. It does mean that we remind ourselves that we're living with people who are lost and they need Jesus Christ. And I need to develop sympathy for people's past. Those people who are advocating transgender theology, they may not know anything about Jesus. Maybe they haven't heard about it. You think, well, everybody's heard about Jesus. In the Deep South, we all have, but even here they haven't. Right? There are a lot of things that happen in people's lives that influence them for the rest of their life. People who are the victims of sexual abuse. There are a lot of ways that manifests itself. Some are very negative ways. Don't cast stones at those people. A lot of times people who struggle with homosexuality have been sexually abused as a child. It's easy for me to sit back and throw stones at them. Understand everybody has a past. And let that bring a little empathy out of you. Here's the second question. What has helped you become a better servant then? What has helped you become a better servant? I'm almost done. We're landing the plane.
My answer is
Yes.
My answer is the same for both of those, focusing on Jesus.
Yeah.
And then I just want to add, it has occurred to me because the whole LGBTQ plus, those are all people searching for love.
Yeah.
Right? They're just searching in the wrong place.
Yeah.
And so, if that has helped me.
Yeah. I'll throw this in there because I used to do this sometimes. I would share memes that I thought were funny. Maybe sometimes those memes were mean. I shared one time about how silly transgender, all that stuff was. And the mother of a Christian that I know whose child was going through that wrote me and said, Mark, that was mean. It was. It was mean. I thought it was funny because it fit, my philosophies, but it was mean. There's no one that would have read that and thought, oh, I want to learn more about Jesus now after that one. That is my number one responsibility. That's yours. So let me close this out. What's helped you to become a better servant? Let me just give you a couple of suggestions. Again, be amazed at Jesus. Be amazed at how he served you, how he cleansed you. I don't want you to live in your past, but I do think it's helpful sometimes for us to stick our head into that world and just remember what we were. Remember what we could have been had it not been for Jesus. And thank him every day that he had mercy and grace upon me. Ask myself, what would Jesus say? What would God say at judgment if I don't serve someone? We have some insight into this with the parable of talents, right? Guy had 5 talents. How many talents did the master want? 5 more, right? Guy had 2 talents. How many did the master want? 2 more. He didn't want 5 out of the 2 talent man. He's not wanting something out of you that you cannot produce. But if you can, that's what he expects. Do you want to be there on the judgment day, having never helped someone who is in need? Having heard of a need within the church of a brother or sister, but you didn't do anything? You've all heard the story of everybody, somebody, anybody. There was an important job that had to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about it because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Guys, that happens in churches all the time. A call goes out of a need. This is a way you can serve your brother or sister in Christ. Someone needs a car ride. The church. Someone needs to go to the doctor on Tuesday. You could do it, but you're sure someone else will. And what we got to do is condition ourselves to recognize that I'm going to stand before God one day. And if he gives me the opportunity, and I can, I need to do it. And if not me, then who? If not me, who's going to do it? You guys have great elders here. But I'll tell you, all your elders won't be here forever. Which brings up a really important question. Who's going to step up? When you have really good elders, I saw it at Douglas Hills. Everybody just thinks they'll be here forever, you know, and we'll always have these great elders until you don't. So who's going to do it? Who's going to step up? Somebody's got to. And that's how you serve. And last one, admire the people who do serve. You think about the Christian that you remember so much over the years, who's meant so much to you. My guess is that person was probably a servant. So don't just admire them. Serve like they did. Serve like Jesus did. So, heavy stuff tonight. It's hard. I think as a Christian, the lesson of loving your fellow man is both easy and hard. And through the course of your life, there'll be some people that you will love well, and there'll be people that you will struggle with that. But the victory's in the struggle, guys. Our master, our teacher, said this is the way we live. I don't have to tell you this. But you're not going to be judged solely by how many times you come into this building. Take this the way I mean it. You're not going to be judged solely on whether or not you used an instrument of music when you sing, or how the funds were used. Those are important. But Jesus said, we're going to be judged by how we love. That scares me. I have a really good track record of going to church. I have a really good track record of giving the funds back to the Lord that are used in an appropriate way. I have an extremely good track record of not singing with an instrument of music. Love's a lot harder. May God help us. May God help us to really seek to be like our Master. All right. We're going to sing in just a moment. And this is a time, it's not just a tradition, this is a time where we sing to reflect. Where are you at? If you're not a Christian, you need to know that God loves you deeply. You say, well, if he knew what I did, he wouldn't love me. He knows exactly what you've done. He knows exactly what you thought. He loves you anyway. He wants you to come to him. So we're going to sing in just a moment. If you need to become a child of God, if you need to learn about becoming a child of God, we want to do whatever we can to help you tonight. If we need to teach you, we'll teach you. If you're ready to be baptized, ready, let's go. Then we can go. You can get baptized tonight. If you're a child of God, and this lesson has made you uncomfortable, as it's made me uncomfortable. If it's made you uncomfortable and you're walking away going, I got to really think about whether I'm really working on this discipleship thing because this is not really what I'm comfortable with, then ask God to forgive you and strengthen you. But know what he wants out of you. He's got mercy and grace, but know what he wants out of you. If you want the prayers of the church, we'd be happy to pray with you, whatever the need is. Won't you come now while we stand, while we sing?